Hey, I'm gonna try and show you quickly how to kind of use Lightroom to apply some changes to all your photos, spare you the problems you might have if you were to use Photoshop on an individual basis. I might stumble through this a bit. It's been a while since I've used Lightroom. It's certainly not my um, strongest Adobe program, so bear with me. But yeah, here we go. So the first thing you're going to want to do is drag your photos into Lightroom. It's going to ask you if you want to copy them in, etc., etc. I'm just going to click import. So here is the library and your latest import. And we'll go to develop. And because I just upgraded Lightroom, it's going to ask us all sorts of weird questions. These look really good. The color balance seems decent, better than they were for sure. But there's always a little more tweaking that we can do. So here we are, of course, and we can adjust the white balance, which is what WB stands for. You can see that's pretty horrendous. Super in the blue. We can do custom and play with that. This might be a little closer to what we expect. Now, the first thing I should mention is there's really no right or wrong to any of this. Lightroom, with rare exception, is non-destructive editing, so you can always go back. And because of that, it's kind of just, there's no great truth or right or wrong when it comes to this. If it looks good, and like I would say that doesn't, that's wrong. And that's wrong, but if the temperature needs to be dialed down a bit so that we get more blue out of this, cool. And then tint, and see, I think the tint's probably good, but whatever. You can play with all of these. You can underexpose, you can overexpose. Again, no right or wrong answer. One thing you might want to do, particularly because we expect that background to be black, and as it stands, it's kind of a, it's a warm, dark gray. You may want to dial these in a little more. At any rate, there's that. Lens correction might be one thing to try. You can see that's quite the jump. Depending on what you're shooting with, that might make sense. But I'll leave that up to you. I'm not sure if that is something you want to mess around with. You can go to the profile and select it. I don't know what you're on, but this is where you would do it. I think you said a Nikon, but that might have been somebody else in class. At any rate, you can go through this and pick your actual lens so that you know specifically that it's the inverse of what you're shooting with. You can explore all of these, like I said. These are all things that you can generally do in camera, and that therefore are fair game as far as this project goes. Don't do anything too wild, like go into effects and change weird things or add grain or whatever. But within that, hue, saturation, etc. That's all cool. Up here, you can crop, which may be handy and helpful for what you are doing from letter to letter to make sure they're square and in the frame and everything like that. I think these are off limits given that they're healing tool and stuff like that. Trying to see if there's anything else that we might want to mess with. You could, of course, use this to mess with your levels. Again, a million ways to skin a cat. There's no real right or wrong, for instance. So we can click done. If you're unhappy with any of that, you can click reset. I'm not going to do it to prove that we can, but what you can do is select all three, and now this sync button appears. So if we're to look at this, you can see it's warmer. Maybe the background is not as gray as it was, or sorry, as dark as it was in this version in your E. So if you select all of these and click sync, and I select it all by holding down shift, just in case you don't know that trick. If you hit sync, it'll give you the option to synchronize anything with any specificity you want for all of the photos in your set. Now that doesn't mean they're all going to come out correctly, but particularly if you are shooting in a controlled environment, like you, I assume you are, they're going to get pretty darn close. So you can select all of these. You can select very specific ones, like if you just wanted to change the white balance or you just wanted to change the saturation from picture to picture, you can do that. But I would leave most, if not all of them, checked, and then go ahead and click synchronize. And now we'll go back to that H, and you can see how much darker that background became. Now maybe because this photo we used as our base level one, maybe because it didn't include yellow, we went a little nuts when it came to the temperature and tint. Maybe that yellow looks a little too whatever, so we need to dial that back. Maybe that's better. Maybe we'll oversaturate this a bit just to make it pop when it is printed. I don't know. But now what we can do, select all those again and resync them. Oops, sorry. That is one thing I forgot to mention. I'm going to undo the synchronize, so we'll go back to that. Now it's a little more warm. We basically want to make this. See how this one is, maybe you can't see it, maybe it's not super noticeable, but this is actually a brighter shade of gray, and this is darker, and this is of course darkest because it's not selected. The one that is brightest is going to be what's determining how everything else is synced. So if we select this one first and now this one, and I click sync, that should make this one based on the same settings, and you can see it's now, this is oversaturated, for instance, etc., etc. You can do that for really anything you do in here. And now if we go back to library, you can see from frame to frame they're pretty consistent. Now of course you have things like this vignetting and maybe some shadows and stuff that are darker here, it's darker down here, etc. I wouldn't worry too much about that. If you really want to go nuts, you can drag them into Photoshop and kind of use the curves tool. You can do that in here as well. I can't quite remember where exactly, but if you Google Lightroom and curves, I'm sure it'll pop up. Maybe that seems like a bit of a cop-out, but with any of these programs, unless you're using them 8 hours a day, 6 days a week, they're just so robust that it's so hard to know where everything lives, especially from program to program. It's what most people do most of the time, is just simply kind of do a cursory Google search to remember where it lives. And then the final thing you'll want to do that's weird about Lightroom is that I mentioned non-destructive editing. That is to say that you can always revert, right? If you go to develop and you click on this one, you can always go reset and go back to the original. It's only until back in your library that you export them that things become finalized. And you can see when you click export, I've only selected 2 files over here. You want to select the ones that you want to export. You can select a specific folder. You can put them in a subfolder. You can overwrite without a warning. You can choose a new name. If you do that, it'll give you an option to rename the file, for instance. Everything from what the extension is set in, the image format, the image quality, etc., etc., etc. You can resize them, pixels per inch, all that can be negotiated. And so you can show them in Finder after you're done. You can open them in Photoshop. Click hard drive. We will put them in the same folder as original, and we'll click export. And that's going to go through every single one and export them. Here's our folder with them. It opened this. You can see these are now different than these. These are a little flatter, a little less saturated, etc., etc. But that should be enough to get you from your raw files in whatever form those are coming in, whether they're JPEG or RAW or whatever, into something that's printable, that looks a little more consistent, and that makes things pop. Hopefully that's helpful. Email me if you have any questions. Otherwise, I'll see you in class.